Welcome to Back at the Movies, the podcast where we revisit our favorite Siskel and Ebert episodes.
Almost 50 years ago, two Chicago film critics, Gene Siskel.
I'm Gene Siskel of the Chicago Tribune.
And Roger Ebert.
And I'm Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times.
Were hired to discuss movies on a local PBS station. They were rivals and competitors, and over 3 decades, they never missed a chance to let the other one know he was wrong.
Their passion for film made them television stars and helped pave the way for a generation of movie lovers, including your hosts, Dylan Wilcox and Miranda Broder. I'm your co-host, Dylan Wilcox, a movie buff who went from selling popcorn at the local movie theater to working in Hollywood.
And I'm your co-host, Miranda Broder, an English and film teacher living in the Bay Area. We've experienced so many movies together throughout the years, and so many discoveries were thanks to Siskel and Ebert.
We'll be reviewing the movies and the reviewers, discussing if the films hold up and if their opinions hold up, as we hope to discover and rediscover some gems along the way.
This is Back at the Movies, and the balcony is open.
Today's episode of Siskel and Ebert, which aired February 9th, 1991, we are trying not to let Siskel kill our buzz too much as we delve into 2 women in peril movies, the iconic Silence of the Lambs and the less iconic Sleeping with the Enemy. They ended up being the highest-grossing movies of that month, and of course the following year, The Silence of the Lambs would sweep the Oscars' top 5 awards, including Best Picture. Sleeping with the Enemy went home empty-handed. We also discuss Steve Martin's LA story and if the traffic jokes still land 30 years later. But right now, put the lotion in the basket and rearrange those kitchen cupboards like a proper stalker would. Back at the movies. Miranda?
Yes?
Have the lambs stopped screaming? Since we saw this in 1991?
We were just saying off air before that this is a very weird movie to memorize.
I know, it's so...
all the lines to it.
It's so dreadful, and I mean that in the dread sort of way, but also campy.
Really, I mean, I've also memorized pretty much all of Back to the Future as well, which I think is a little more appropriate, but this is... I was rewatching it for the podcast, and it's always, yeah, I was like, this is just a strange one that I know every part that's going to happen.
Everything. But yet I find it so watchable.
Yes.
And it's one of these movies, I mean, we've revisited, and will be revisiting so many.
Yeah.
And we've stumbled upon one now that is so iconic and really just got so ingrained into pop culture in a really deep way that there's very few movies, I think, from the 90s that have this kind of cachet. And this was from 1991.
Yeah, so many people have tried to recreate that same thing. And I think it launched a real serial killer love in this country.
Launched a huge serial killer thing. There was a lot of interesting things going on. This was also the summer of Sleeping with the Enemy, which was also this week, which I found interesting that these 2 movies were released at the same time.
Yes.
This was, I think, kind of near, or 1991 was the year of the woman. Or maybe it was 1992, but they talked about it at the Oscars in 1992 about 1991. I don't know. It was very much with Thelma and Louise.
Oh, yeah.
Not wait for us to talk about that. Was in the air, you know?
It's funny that we just got 1 year in the 90s.
Yes. And they're like, let's put that away.
1992. We'll give them 1992.
Yeah. So I was expecting Siskel and Ebert to be 2 huge thumbs up. This is a modern classic. And it was a little different than that. So let's first hear what Gene Siskel said. Clip 10.
The horrors of female abuse are too much with us, I think, now to be trifled with anymore in the movies. We had this complaint about the picture involving Julia Roberts. I have it again here. I didn't learn a thing about serial killers from this movie. A much more honest, less exploitive film on the same subject was last year's Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer. By contrast, The Silence of the Lambs is a star-studded freak show directed by the usually enormously talented Jonathan Demme, who I think for the first time in his career has picked a surprisingly trashy project.
So Siskel, I think, was maybe in a bit of a mood at this episode.
he was looking for it to be very didactic and educational. And I don't know if that's what the purpose of this movie was supposed to be.
Not at all. And just it felt like he got maybe hung up on that or something.
Yeah.
And just kind of missed a lot of the other great things about this movie. I'm just gonna say I love this movie. I saw this in the movie theater before I was 17. So this was totally like, I think my sister bought me a ticket. I ran into some friends there and I remember sitting next to them, and it was just, I was just captivated the whole time.
I thought I saw it with my dad because my father had read the book. And so I saw it with him and I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. And then it inspired me to read the book. Normally I like to read the book before I see the movie, but it actually worked fine to read it afterwards. And I love the book as well. It's actually, it pretty much sticks to the book very, very well. And I thought they did a good job with all the stuff at the end. Like they did.
I read the book too after I saw the movie. And I have a really good memory about reading the book because it was one of those lazy Saturday afternoons. And I just sat down and started reading it. And I read it, if not in one sitting, a day and a half.
Yeah. I mean, totally binge-worthy.
It also kind of spoke to, by the late 90s and a decade sitting with Silence of the Lambs, how so many of the campy aspects really took over.
Yeah.
And it kind of, as we were saying, it's so watchable, I think, partly because there's this camp factor, even though it's really dark and gruesome. Ebert was much kinder to it, so let's hear what he said, and then we can talk about the reactions.
Well, this is a tough film to review because, of course, in terms of its subject matter, one could easily target it as you have. And also, I think that the ending doesn't really work. Once she gets into the house of Buffalo Bill, it does become a standard who's behind this door, who's going to jump on me from the shadows. The first part of this film, though, Gene, is terrifically effective, partially because of the real tension, the dynamic interaction between Jodie Foster and Anthony Hopkins. It's one of the most peculiar and fascinating relationships I've seen in a movie in a long time. Hopkins is very good here. Foster is very good here. The dialogue is at a very high level of intelligence, and the movie works not perhaps in the same way as Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, but effectively. And I think that you're really shortchanging a lot of skill and craft and art that went into this film.
I totally disagree with him about the ending. I thought the ending was really well done and not very standard. I thought it was that's what I liked about it when I first saw the movie, and I still think that. I feel like it was a really good, I kind of longed for that first time seeing it when I didn't know anything about what was going to happen, because I was totally, floored by the ending.
I totally agree with you, and I can see how maybe on the page or kind of abstractly it does feel like so many other routine thrillers, but I think so thematically, and rewatching it again for the umpteenth time, first of all, you do get something new out of it each time you watch it, which is definition, one of them, of a stone cold classic. But this time I was thinking about how he's watching her in the dark and calling back to when Lecter is talking to her and saying, don't you feel their eyes on you? And don't you feel, and just this theme of men always looking at her and how she sticks out and how she's in this man's world, not only in the FBI, but also just this man's world of violence and murdering women, and just how scary this is, a world for women.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jodie Foster was smart in choosing this movie, and it kind of came off the heels of, was it The Accused?
The Accused, yeah.
Yeah, which definitely made her solidly a feminist actress, I think. But this also, I mean, first of all, everyone sort of sells her short at first, thinking she's a female. Is she going to be able to, she doesn't command the room,
And she gets the job specifically because she's a female.
Right. And they think that she might be able to crack his hard exterior a little bit and get inside of him. I know that this is not the first time that a theme of really getting to know the enemy happens in literature and film, but I feel like it launched a huge fascination with evil that we have. I mean, psychological fascination with evil, because so many things that have followed that, it's just like, it's uninteresting to us to explore good people like Gandhi and Mother Teresa. It's not boring. It's Hannibal Lecter, like serial killer. This is really fascinating. And this is how we're going to solve the case, too. We're going to get inside their head.
Yeah, and the play with you get two serial killers for the price of one.
True.
And the brilliant way that this movie makes the ultimate enemy also her ally and her, it's almost like a romance. They really need each other.
They understand each other.
They
really
understand each other. And you do this fascinating contradiction of a serial killer that can do all these horrible things, but is also polite and believes in like norms. And it just really gets into the moral gray area of something that's fundamentally amoral. And I do feel like Siskel missed the boat. Let's hear a little bit of their argument.
Okay.
You know, sometimes you say, I think you blew it on this one. I think you're being too easy on this picture in this way. He is presented, the Anthony Hopkins character is presented as this big evil thing, and we're going down there to see them, a journey into hell and all that. And frankly, he was so pumped up, and the music was so pumped up at such a high level
It
that
worked for me. It worked.
Well, then you're easy, because for me, I thought, oh, come on. A guy who's truly frightening doesn't need, a huge organ playing in the background. I didn't buy it at all.
I hear what he's saying.
I do, but I disagree. I think it's one of the iconic entrances that he is just standing there after you see these like dark, what you would think of these guys trapped in the cells at the very end of the hallway. It's lit. There's a different kind of glass. He's very still. He's very in control. It really feels almost like he's coming to her, even though he's the one behind the cell. So sorry, Siskel.
I mean, I think I get where he's coming from, where if he's truly like a someone to be feared, then we should fear the person, the things that he says or the things that he does. Yeah. But I mean, we aren't reading a book about a serial killer and getting inside his head in that way. We have to use movie magic in order to like inflate the emotion. You know, I mean, yeah, I think that that is very dramatic, but I never felt like it was overly dramatic. I felt like this movie actually pulls away from the over dramatic. It's like the thing that's really creepy about it is that they never really focus on anything for very long. Like you still are left with the essence or the image of something really creepy. Like a couple examples when they're examining the body of one of the victims, and then the camera's not actually on the victim at all. The camera's on her and watching her view of, what she's seeing. And then just for a split second at the end of the scene, we see her, the victim, laying on the slab, but not like in gruesome detail or anything like that. I mean, it's horrible, but it's just horrible enough to give you that feeling, kind of like Hitchcock, does with the Psycho, and it's not overplayed.
It is, and it's essential to the story because you see the triangles, and like that's a visual cue for when she sees at the end in the closet the same thing. That's when she kind of puts it together. So it's helpful to move the story forward. And this movie, just the screenplay, just really like every scene matters.
Yeah, and I do think Jonathan Demme's direction is great in this movie. I know that there's controversy about whether it should have won the Oscar, which it did that year, and we can talk about that in a second. But I do think he made some choices that really upped the ante and making it just get under your skin in the way that I think a real good thriller/horror movie should. I mean, like at the end when she's walking through his house, we see a little bit of his house. We see like this area. We see that, and then she goes into the bath, but you don't see this person in the bathtub for very long, and we're not even sure it's a human.
Yeah. Watching it again, I was like, I will never figure out what that is.
Yeah, it's like just a mingling of different body parts or something. But just we know it's gross, and so he shows us just enough to like really creep us out, but not too much. He doesn't overdo it. So I have a question for you. Why do you think that it won that year?
Well, it's interesting. Not only won that, it won Best Director, Actor, Actress, and Screenplay. The 5 major category sweep that's only been done twice before. There was something going on that year too, because the other movie that people thought might win was Beauty and the Beast, which was the first animated movie to be nominated. And talk about polar opposites. Something really like light and lovely and just makes you, feel like you're walking on air watching it. And then you have
Right.
Silence of the Lambs, which is really dark and creepy. But I think there was something that really stuck with people, and it came out in February that year. It was not a fall or winter release. Oscar
Yep.
movies usually are. And there's a little bit of it like it was on home video, so people might have easier access to see it, but it really just stayed with the cultural consciousness like it has ever since. I have something I want to. Let's finish up their argument.
Okay.
They keep going. This is clip
Well,
13.
This is the movies. What did you want? A documentary, black and white television, shoot it on
No,
video?
the reason why Henry, the Portrait of a Serial Killer works is because these people, my intuition, I don't have any first-hand knowledge, these people tend to be kind of dull.
Well, they're two different kinds of movies, and you're using one to criticize the other.
Yes,
instead of,
we always do that, Roger. We say better
why
pictures of the
can't you
same
criticize
subject.
this on its own terms instead of saying
I'm
what it is?
criticizing on its own terms. I wasn't compelled by anybody except, I suppose, the Jodie Foster character as a strong woman.
Come on, a great performance.
Not a great performance, a decent performance. She's
Anthony
following.
Hopkins,
No,
great.
I thought that was way overplayed.
Really?
Mood.
Yeah.
But here's my question. Well, I have two things. Does he have a point that if this was more unsettling, should it have been too gruesome for people to rewatch and start quoting, have this camp factor?
Yeah. I mean, I guess I don't relate to the camp factor part of it as much as you do. I never, like when you mentioned that, I hadn't thought of it as that campy. I actually think of it as one of those films that's kind of hard to watch. Like I don't sit down and think, I'm going to watch Silence of the Lambs tonight. It's actually, it still creeps me out. I thought I could show it to my kid, and I started watching it again with him, and I was like, no, this isn't going to be a good one. This is not going to be a good one for us. But yeah, I mean, so explain what you mean about campy. I think that's interesting.
I think so quotable, like Precious and
Yeah.
don't you
She
make
puts
me
the
hurt your
lotion in the
dog in this
basket.
horrible situation.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if there was a little bit of disassociation from like when we all saw it and were scarred by it in the early 90s.
I
But
do
this
think
might
that
be
it's-
tied, the campiness might be tied to another aspect I wanted to kind of discuss watching it in 2023, is because
Right.
it got a lot of pushback at the time and still get some pushback for being anti-LGBT, and a lot of trans people have a real issue with this movie.
Yeah.
And it's one of these 90s movies where I'm really, I
Torn.
get it, but I do think the movie makes a step to separate the
Yeah.
transphobia from what's actually happening in the story to get the story forward. But I also understand how this is really problematic to have out there in the culture.
Right.
Well-
No, I mean, they do make the distinction. Like at one point, she says real trans people are usually very gentle.
Transvestite,
and-
before even
Yeah.
the word transgender.
Yeah, exactly. They use transvestite as the term, but that they're normally gentle and not, violent and these kinds of things, and that they didn't think he was a true trans person. So, I mean, in a way, it was ahead of its time in like 91 to even be talking about this at all.
But people remember the visceral moment, when he like does the tuck and like the whole idea of making a skin. It really does play into transphobia.
Oh, it does. Yeah, it's like the way that they'd always make the lascivious bad guy gay, like a wink to gay, the gay community or whatever. And it's because automatically it's going to make him creepy to like, a lot of the population.
Mm-hmm. And you can try to explain it all away, but it's going to hit people. Oh my gosh, it's really scary. This was also a year before Basic Instinct, and that's when like the
Wow.
LGBT community was like, enough already.
Yeah, no,
And-
I definitely think it has. I mean, in that way, it is definitely dated.
Yes.
Please don't look at this movie as a educational
No.
a place where
Yeah.
you're going to learn about like
Sorry,
trans.
sorry,
trans
Siskel.
community.
It's not a documentary.
I think if you're talking about it being kind of campy. Like I think it's become campy. I think it's become campy from in a different way than some things become campy. I think if we distance ourselves from it because it is so horrific. I mean, my husband and I will say every once in a while, like, she puts the lotion in the basket, and it's like that actually is like pretty freaking horrific.
Yeah, and she sees like a fingernail or something on the side.
I
It's
know.
awful.
I mean, it's disgusting and horrible. And I mean, but no one can argue that it isn't disgusting and horrible. I think it's so disgusting and horrible that we have to make like jokes about it. It wouldn't be palatable otherwise. So yeah,
And Lecter, I think Lecter totally became a camp figure. You know, it's a bunch of movies, and Hopkins kept coming back for what felt like a paycheck. And the Red Dragon movie, I saw it once in the theater. I remember it was fine, but he really did take on this larger than life, one of the most recognizable villains of the culture of the 20th century, right?
he's on all the T-shirts with all the other ones like Freddy Krueger and
Yeah, he made it.
Jason and whatnot. But I wanted to go back to the Oscar discussion a little bit and ask you. So it was up against Beauty and the Beast. It was also up against JFK and The Prince of Tides and Bugsy. And all of those movies, I would say, were like, except for maybe Beauty and the Beast, which I really enjoyed myself personally, I'd say they were all kind of mediocre films. So like Prince of Tides especially, I wonder if that's why it won, is because it was a fairly weak year. Beauty and the Beast is animated, so that's going to be a stretch, right? JFK was flawed.
And he was just coming off, Oliver Stone was just coming off his second Oscar win for Best Director. So there was very much
give it to him again, yeah. And then Prince of Tides, is total schlock. Although they didn't know that at the time. People really liked it.
And that was the Woman of the Year when Barbara Streisand was not nominated for an Oscar for Best Director. And then Bugsy felt a little bit, we had already had Goodfellas and The Godfather Part 3, and it probably felt a little, but I remember liking that. Oh, this will be a fun year to unpack in other episodes. But yeah, none of them stick in your craw like The Silence of the Lambs.
None of them became that, iconic movie like you were saying.
Yeah. And this genre, horror thriller, never gets nominated, let it win. So it was like a nice, when this genre is firing on all cylinders.
It's kind of like, though, I don't want to be a member of a club that would have me as a member, because I hear people who are big horror fans are like, well, I wouldn't even classify that as a horror movie. It's kind of like Get Out. It's like, yeah, technically I guess it's horror, but it was it got so much mainstream attention that like it somehow leaves the horror realm, because horror has to be grainy and B grade and
well, yeah, I took a horror class in college, and that was one of the, what does elevated horror mean? It's still a horror movie, but with A-list actors and maybe more attention paid to the screenplay and direction. But this is a genre that's always been ghettoized as not worthy of, like you said, Gandhi or something. And it's like, well, why not? When horror can provide a visceral reaction, and it does teach us things too. I think. I mean, I learned things from. I feel like because it's sort of one of those genres that kind of slips under the radar a little bit. They can be more creative in their exploration of the human psyche. And when it's not, when it's not trying to be important with a capital I, there's more fun space to play in.
And maybe that's what Siskel's kind of pushing back on. He wanted it to be more of that Henry portion of a serial killer, like lower budget, but more sort of in depth. Of course, it would be great, but it's not that type of movie. It's not really that movie.
Yeah. So big thumbs up from me.
Yep, me too. We agree, Dylan. We
agree with Ebert. Ebert liked it, but he didn't give it. He kind of did a reassessment later on in the 90s when it really became part of the zeitgeist. But he gave it thumbs up, and Siskel, sorry, it's not Henry of Portrait of a Serial Killer.
Okay, our next movie that we're talking about today is Sleeping with the Enemy, also 1991. Also a psychological thriller. This one was directed by Joseph Rubin, stars Julia Roberts and Patrick Bergin and Kevin Anderson. And it's also based on a book. And it's about a woman who is married to a complete abusive asshole, and how she escapes from him and then tries to build a new life, and then stuff happens.
Hijinks ensue. I believe this was Julia Roberts' big movie after Pretty Woman, so this was her just beginning major movie star mode.
Yes. It made $13 million on its opening weekend. So that was really huge. And I think it does have a lot to say about how popular she was at the time, like after Pretty Woman, which everyone loved. They had high hopes for this movie. And I don't know. I think people were kind of disappointed at the time.
But it did make a lot of money.
Yeah.
Siskel and Ebert were definitely disappointed. Here's what Ebert said, clip 5.
This is one of those movies where with every scene there at the end, you're sitting there noticing all the loose ends, the unanswered questions, the impossibilities, the things that couldn't have happened that way, the stuff that's done even though somebody wouldn't have known to do it, and all the stupid mistakes that the characters make. The screenplay of Sleeping with the Enemy is a particularly sloppy job of writing, which recycles all the standard cliches but raises a lot more questions than it answers.
Sloppy.
Now, this one I would actually classify as campy. Like,
Absolutely. Okay, we saw this together.
Yeah.
And we were having a ball.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like it was campy from the start. And it was campy in a way where it's like, it's so bad that it's good.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so many fun things to like make fun about that it actually makes it a super enjoyable watch because it's just so terrible.
And rewatching it, I loved that this movie was so obvious and that the shit that you could get away with in 1991, and maybe, I don't know if you can get away with that now.
Like what in particular?
Like zero subtext, like no, it's just super obvious. And her character is just, well, they're both, what am I trying to say? Campy.
We don't know much
You're
about
right,
her.
campy. Yeah, we're not given any, we need to piece things together ourselves because it just wants to get to the luridness of the situation so quickly.
Right. Yeah. The fact that it's even like being talked about I think it has a lot to do with the fact that Julia Roberts in it. I think this movie would have completely fallen into absolute obscurity if it had not had her in it. Because it's just such a nothing movie. It's just
such a nothing burger. Yeah.
Yeah, and I felt really, almost went against it did go up against my principles to pay $1.99 to rewatch it. Because I was like,
it's for the work, Miranda. It's for the work.
I know. Take one for the team. You want to play some of the things they said? Because I think some of the things they said, I totally agree with on this one.
Yeah, let's hear what Siskel said. He gave a little nugget of good news for this movie, but not a lot. Clip 6.
I would give credit to Kevin Anderson for a really interesting performance in this picture of the guy next door, and he doesn't play him like a hero. He plays him like kind of a shy guy who sees a lovely person come next door to him, and he knows there's a problem there, and he tries tentatively. That's a wasted performance.
Well, I kept writing my notes. It's because he's gay. She meets him as a whistling West Side Story. He's like a drama teacher. For a date, they go and try on costumes. Okay, that crazy scene with...
I know.
When Brown Eyed Girl is playing and she's trying on the costumes, I don't know this for a fact, but I know this is 1,000% true, that after Pretty Woman, they were probably like, oh my God, we've got to put in a makeover scene or something.
Right.
There's no way that would have been in there without Pretty Woman.
You're right. Yeah, no, totally. He ticks all of the stereotypes.
And then they keep going to town on the movie, including clip 7, which I very distinctly remember us laughing about in the theater.
Roberts does what she can, but come on. I mean,
agree.
How about the scene where she gets back home and finds out, we find out earlier her husband likes to have all the cans in the shelf arranged perfectly correctly.
Right.
She gets back home, she looks, the cans are mixed up, looks again, they're all arranged. So that's what that's what a killer does.
Right.
He sneaks into the kitchen and rearranges the cans in between stalking somebody around a relatively small house.
So good.
That was one of the things we were making fun of at the time. It's like,
we were like, go to the cabinets.
And she was looking in another cabinet at some other point where it was like
he didn't have time. He didn't have time to rearrange that one. It's hard to manage your time when you want to kill your wife.
Exactly. I mean, the fact that he put it together that she was not really dead did not make any sense at all. Like the fact that one of those lights was broken. Like why would he instantly go to, oh, she must have faked her own death?
I was confused why first of all, why would you dump your ring in the toilet?
That was
Like-
so fucking stupid. I'm sorry. I can't contain myself. That was just so fucking stupid.
And then I was like, and why is he just realizing this now? And the time frame makes no sense. She cuts her hair, but then it's long again, but then only a few days has passed. So I went on IMDb actually has this big explainer why people are wrong thinking that this makes no sense.
Okay.
Because their beach house was their summer home and they actually live in Boston. And so the scene, so he had been gone for a few months. So when he came back, that's when he saw the light and saw the ring.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. But you shouldn't have to like go to IMDb 20 years later.
Figure it out.
You just
20 years later. Yeah. This movie is definitely, it's a conundrum. Yeah.
Yeah. And the new guys, of course, perfect and totally non-threatening. And I guess it was kind of nice that in this type of movie, you see a man typically in the female role. Like he doesn't really have much of a life outside of her.
He was really gross to me at the time and still is. He's like Richard
Miranda, why do you
Marx.
hate gay people?
He's like Richard Marx. No, the mullet.
It's the mullet, the
yeah.
hair. Yeah.
He's just too yuck. Sorry, Kevin Anderson. I know I'm sure you're a lovely person and you're probably very handsome in real life, but I did not like you in this movie. I didn't find you attractive.
But there were specific things as I started the movie. There are things I specifically remember, like the uneven towels and like the cabinet. And I was like, well, it did leave an impression, but maybe it's because what we brought to it.
Well, I had a kind of strange experience watching this movie for the second time. But 30 years later, right? I actually was somewhat entertained by it the second time. Like I was drawn in, and I think that is it Ebert that talks about how at the beginning it actually had a decent pacing and a decent story, and then it just falls apart. And I think I was drawn in the second time this time watching it, and it was more forgiving of all of the total ridiculousness, especially that ring part. That is just, she thought of everything. She thought of so many things, and then she just threw.
But
her
I'll leave
stupid
behind
metal
the
ring.
one.
She threw a metal ring into the toilet and thought that it would flush. That just doesn't add up.
In the house of the man she's fleeing from.
Exactly. And plus, she's fleeing this guy. If she's not doesn't have any money, I was thinking, why not pocket? You're gonna need money wherever you go. Like. Anyway, it made no sense. But I was kind of like thinking, you know what? I think I'm a different movie watcher now than I was back in my, in the early 90s when I was graduating high school. And I was much more critical back then. And I'm much more satisfied with mediocrity now. I think I would have, if I saw this movie like in the theater or something, I probably would have felt like, it was kind of stupid. But I wouldn't hate it as much as I think I hate it so much because I hated it back then. It offended me in so many ways. But now I don't have those same kind of lofty taste.
Well, it's also different now that so much of this type of movie is on streaming and made available at home. In the early 90s, kids didn't have a lot of options to watch stuff at home if it wasn't on one of the cable networks. And so I think we looked for a little higher level of performance from movies when we went to the theater.
True, that's a good point. When you're paying, what were we paying back then? Like $4.99 to go and see a movie? You want it to be a good movie, right?
They keep piling on. Here's clip 8. Let's talk about the ending in categories of how it falls apart.
Where is the pride of the filmmaker? I know that if I'm directing a thriller, that it's about time to drop the second grab.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
The guy is dead. You know he's not dead. He's coming back for one more shot.
Where's the pride of the filmmaker?
Yeah, I think that's a clip.
Where's the shame?
They could be asking that more.
That's no shame. Oh my goodness.
And I love that the second grab was even a cliche like in 1991.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, would you recommend this movie to people now because for the fun of how stupid it is? Or is it one of those ones that you could totally miss this movie and be totally fine in your life?
Unless you're a Julia Roberts completist, I think there's just so much of this. No, you don't have to go back and watch this.
No.
It's interesting to watch the true movie star. This quick clip of clip 9, Siskel mentions this, and then we can
Julia Roberts is one of the sunniest, loveliest presence to hit the movies in a long, long time. And when she got slapped and punched early in the picture, part of my heart sank in the sense of this. I've seen so many, warm, winning actresses feel they have a need to play an abused character to make that makes them serious.
Well,
she's so talented, she doesn't need it.
If they had a point to make about wife beating, about abusive marriages, that's one thing.
Okay.
But to use it as a hook for exploitation, that's something else.
They're all better than this movie screenplay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think just talking about Julia Roberts, if you want to be a completist, she's a movie star, and like they really picked up on that, and this is like her fourth movie or something.
Right.
I think it's really cool when they can clock, oh, she's a movie star, and you don't want, you want to see her succeed, and you want to see her regardless of what's happening on screen, and was vaulted into the biggest star of the 90s.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe that's why she made the decision to do this movie, is that she didn't want to be pigeonholed as the Tom Hanks, the female actress.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it was almost like it was a made-for-TV movie.
Oh, totally.
So it was it took her down a few notches, I think, in her seriousness as an actress. Like she was a movie star when she made Pretty Woman, I think, and it kind of cheapened her a little bit to do this. But I mean, of course, Julia Roberts went on to do lots of other things, and she proved herself as an actress, I think, with Erin Brockovich. We love that movie, and she's great in it. It's just too bad that we didn't have an Erin Brockovich back then, because then she had a different trajectory in terms of her career.
Yeah, and she did try to do a few different things in the 90s, like she did Mary Riley and I Love Trouble and Dying Young, and I think she did Flatliners before. That was like around the Pretty Woman time. And so now we think of Julia Roberts, the romantic comedy megastar, which she was, but she had years of not doing that before she got back into it with My Best Friend's Wedding, Notting Hill, and Runaway Bride.
Yeah.
And so like it was the late 90s, she kind of came back around from the early 90s and be like, okay, this is what I'm good at, this is what people want to see me in. And that's when she really latched on to Julia Roberts, the brand.
Yeah.
And then she won her Oscar because that was such a perfect marriage of movie star and role in Erin Brockovich. But yeah, she's but no, at the end of the day, I this is a thumbs down for me.
Oh yeah, it's a thumbs down. I don't bother.
Yeah.
You'd have to pay $1.99, and it's just not worth it. But I mean, if it was free and it's like you had absolutely nothing to do, and you have a couple friends over, and you want to, like, I don't know, have a couple drinks and just make fun of something, it might be okay. But I still give it a thumbs down, because I don't even think there's enough in here to make fun of.
Miranda, where is your pride?
Have I no
Have you no pride?
I guess not.
All right. Well, we're all in agreement on this one.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Watch out for those cans. L.A. Story, Steve Martin post-Parenthood around Grand Canyon. I was excited to revisit this because I hadn't seen it since the movie theater in 1991, and I've now lived in L.A. for 20 years.
Oh, yeah.
So I was all set to experience it as a native.
Yeah.
Siskel and Ebert. Yeah, Siskel in his mood this episode. Did not care for it. Clip number 1.
Our first film is Steve Martin's comedy, L.A. Story, a film that I had extraordinary expectations for, and they weren't met. The idea of Steve Martin tackling the phoniness of Los Angeles is just a wonderful idea. I just didn't laugh that much at his jokes. The problem, the jokes are all in service of a dreary love story.
Maybe.
Yeah.
He goes on, clip 2. He really didn't like it.
Now, the love story involves a ridiculous conceit of a freeway traffic sign with a mind of its own that spells out what it's thinking to Steve Martin, and eventually it tells him what it really wants to do in life is direct a movie. Another tired joke. L.A. Story doesn't devastate an awfully easy target, Los Angeles, Southern California culture, and that's why it didn't work for me.
I agree with him. I think at the time when I first saw it, I thought the same thing. I had higher hopes for it. A, because I love Steve Martin, and I was a huge fan of Steve Martin movies. I love The Jerk and The Man with the Brains, and All of Me, and all of those movies are fabulous and funny. And so I was a little disappointed because it wasn't as funny as those. But also, I just felt like it didn't really go deep enough. I mean, there was a little, like, the best part about it, the best parts, the most memorable parts are the ones where they, like the coffee scene, or like half cast with the twist, and also the when they get in the car and drive to the next house.
Yep.
That was funny.
That was funny. Rings true. All these years later.
That.
And the earthquake that they don't really care about. But I agree with him that it didn't really. I think it's kind of telling that some of the jokes are so obvious that even now you're like, okay, yeah, sure. And the love story is kind of dreary. That was his wife, I think at the time still, Victoria Tennant.
Yeah.
She was also in All of Me.
Yeah.
I don't think she's the most dynamic screen presence.
Right.
And I think that clearly Steve Martin fawns over her, and I think saw something in her maybe that I just don't see, and I think that really does take over too much of the movie. And when the love story really kicks in, it doesn't really work. Ebert loved this movie. Clip 3.
I don't know when I've been more in disagreement with you about a comedy than about this one, which I like from beginning to end, and which I think is a masterpiece of tone, which takes this love story, which is, I think, a sweet little love story, not dumb at all, and manages to combine it with things that are slapstick, things that are pure fantasy, things that are wild imaginations, things that are subtle, things that are social satire, and all at the same time keeping all of those balls in the air at the same time. This is a very good movie. It reminded me of work by people like Keaton and Tati, who were able to find kind of a sweet middle ground. I don't know what you were looking for here.
Slow down there, Tiger.
Is he like in bed with Steve Martin or
Yes,
something? What the hell?
You know what's interesting? He used to hate Steve Martin. He did not like The Jerk and The Man with Two Brains. He really saw him as one of these SNL cheap comedy guys.
Yeah.
And then he came around with Roxanne and with Parenthood. And so by this time, clearly he was having a thing for Steve Martin. Look, I disagree that it juggles all these balls so deftly. I think it has these moments.
Yeah.
It's not really firing on all cylinders. And I think that kind of like shows that I don't know how many great LA movies there are, but this isn't really considered one of them.
It's interesting that he loved this movie, because I kind of think that and this is why I've never really, I do agree with him on some films, obviously, and I think I totally respect that he was a fabulous writer, but I do think he comes from a place often that is more of a privileged class, I think, and I think he definitely has a classist sort of view of things. So it's not surprising to me that he didn't like early Steve Martin movies that much, which were kind of silly and slapsticky and, a little cray-cray. But he seems to like the Steve Martin that's, the art-loving Steve Martin, the one that he's become, the more, the banjo playing, making Broadway show kind of Steve Martin, the more sort of upper-class Steve Martin he seems to have become. And I think he's become less funny. I'm not saying he's not clever or smart or anything.
You loved him in the 80s.
Oh, I just absolutely loved him. I was in love
I
with
did too.
him.
Yeah, you were loved him.
I thought he was the funniest guy, and I was in love with him. I was like 12 years old, in love with like a 50-year-old man. It was really sick, but I was
you were the Lolita.
I was the perv.
Wait, they go at it over this movie, which I'm like, this is your hill you're gonna die on. Clip 4.
The 10% joke isn't funny. The restaurant having to require a financial statement, not funny.
Wait. Let's talk about the restaurant, because you played that clip and then you said nothing funny there. And I was sitting here thinking, well, I laughed. I thought it was funny. I thought it was hilarious. They want his whole entire background in order to get him into this restaurant. What about the automated teller machine joke? We have 2 lines.
I think, you know what that would be a better joke for? New York City. In other words, New York City, mugging on the street is funny. L.A. probably doesn't have.
Oh, then the problem is not with the joke; it's with the city. And geographical difficulty here. No,
that's not my problem.
I think this is an extremely well-made and an extremely funny movie. It's just filled. It's so densely packed with detail after detail after detail. It's not just 3 or 4 things. It's everything.
You bet. I mean, he shoots 100 times and hits maybe 5 for me.
I think we're in complete disagreement here.
Yeah, totally.
Complete disagreement. I'm in the middle. I don't first of all, the funny thing. Either you laugh or you don't. I think we're
Yeah.
learning it's really hard to critique comedy, and it's like really hard to put together comedy, but either it makes you laugh or it doesn't.
Yeah.
And especially for a comedic film, if you're not on board, then you're probably not going to be on board. And
Yeah.
Siskel clearly wasn't on board, and Ebert clearly was.
Yeah, and I mean, it is very much an individual thing, humor, and what we find funny, and also I think a lot of things are just topical too. So I don't think that the LA Story really, watching it now, this is all, kind of cliche, old hat kind of stuff.
I think it's very hard for comedies to travel through time, and
Yeah.
I think the ones that do have more of a dramatic element to them, actually.
Yeah, like the Woody Allen one, like
Yeah, like Good Morning Vietnam.
there's more of where it's more sort of situational,
Yep.
as opposed to shtick or jokes.
Yeah, and this does
Yeah.
feel very shticky, and it does feel like, shooting fish in a barrel, and I don't think the shots hit that many times.
Yeah, no,
But I wasn't like, oh, let this be over.
not
But
quite.
it's not thumbs up for me.
No, it's not.
Marginal thumbs down.
It's a thumbs down for me. I mean, there has to be some movies that I don't like. I can't like everything. I've become such a total non-critical person these days with movies. Like everything's acceptable.
Well, something tells me pretty soon we'll have an episode with a movie you hate, and you'll be
I'll be right
back
back
on track.
Thumbs down. Thumbs down.
Thumbs down. Sorry, Roger.
Yep.
Thanks for listening to Back at the Movies. I'm your host, Dylan Wilcox.
And I'm your host, Miranda Broder. You can find us on social and Letterboxd at BATMPOD. That stands for Back at the Movies Pod. We'd like to thank our producer, Travis Bone, and Jay Edwards for the original music.
If you enjoyed our podcast, please give us 2 thumbs up by rating us 5 stars on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere you listen. That's our show, and until next time, the balcony is still closed.